Hello, coming to you from the bustling land of board gaming, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Reactive Bryce Journey. Tied in with the popular recurring Out of the Dust geek list on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we play that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 27. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring Castellion out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off Mage Knight. On the reaction segment, we remember Rollie Tesh. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review AuZtralia. On the obscure Bryce game segment, I review Dragon Island. And we wrap up the episode by reviewing my top 10 games released in 2018 list. I had a chance to bring Castellion, one of the Oniverse games, out of the dust recently. I last played it 2 years and 14 days ago, and recall I wasn't too impressed with this tile-laying game back then, especially compared to the other entries in the series. But after playing through all of the Onirim expansions recently, I thought I would give this one another try. I thought perhaps that the beginner mode might just not be very interesting, so decided to jump right into the standard mode this time. Turns out the game is much better and much more interesting with the special abilities of the tiles to manipulate. The game clicked with me this time, and now I'm partway through battling through all the difficulty levels. Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Justin Warzenek, username Dr. Evil Z4, brought Mage Knight out of the dust. He last played it 3 years, 4 months, and 7 days ago, and currently rates it an 8 out of 10. He writes, "I can't believe it's been so long. I still remember the last game I played of this 3 years ago. My wife and I played basically the same scenario all day while having a Firefly marathon. This may have made our turns take a bit longer than intended. That said, a friend of mine wanted to give the game a try before he bought it, so I obliged. We played the tutorial mission and he really seemed to like it. He even won. I need to make it a point to play this one more often." Good luck with that, Justin. Mage Knight is one of those games I always have to brush up on the rules again before playing, and as a consequence, has become only a very occasional play for me. It'll be dusty the next time I play, in fact. Reaction segment time. It was with great sadness that I learned of the death of Rollie Tesh, the legendary designer of both the Star Trek and Star Wars CCGs, this previous week. Listeners to my early episodes will recall I discussed these two games at length in my personal history of gaming. Their impact on me and my personal gaming history cannot be understated. But I had also had a chance to get to know Rollie personally in recent months, after he moved to Omaha to work with Spielbound Board Game Cafe, and the Spielmasons board game organization of which I am the chairman of. His official title at the cafe was the Game Maestro, and he enjoyed teaching games as much as learning new ones. He was particularly fond of abstract strategy games, was a ranked tournament chess player, and a former Pente world champion. He continued to be active in designing new games until the very end, and was working on concepts for the mass market with the noble goal of making more of those games actually fun. Rollie will be missed, but he will also be remembered, not only as one of the all-time great revolutionary designers of CCGs, but also for his passion for games and his passion for the gaming community. On the What I Have Been Playing segment this week, I'm going to tell you about AuZtralia, the new game from acclaimed designer Martin Wallace and publisher Stronghold. This is a thematic sequel to Martin Wallace's game A Study in Emerald, which is based on an absolutely insane Neil Gaiman story in which Sherlock Holmes leads a band of freedom fighters against the tyranny of the Great Old One's worldwide rule. Now, 40 years later, the surviving Great Old Ones, including Great Cthulhu himself, have regrouped in AuZtralia, which was previously unexplored and undeveloped because of the travel bans the Great Old Ones instituted during their rule. In AuZtralia, players will build a network of rails into the outback of the continent, establish valuable farms, mine resources, and bring the combat to the last of the Great Old Ones. It's a Cthulhu train game, which sounds like a very silly prospect for a game, but it's something that only the master of train games, Martin Wallace himself, could pull off. And pull it off successfully he has, because this is an amazing game! Here's how it works. Players use a patchwork Tokaido Thebes-esque turn order mechanism to take actions that propel the objectives I just mentioned. Players take these actions using a stock of action cubes, and they can take duplicate actions on future turns by paying a gold resource for each action cube already on the action. Some of these actions also take other resources to perform, but they all take a certain amount of time to perform, which is how the turn order is continually evaluated. From time to time, players can also take an action and recall all of their action cubes. The diceless combat mechanism is very interesting in this game, and uses a deck of combat cards to resolve and assign damage. When a combat action is initiated, players assign certain types of combat units to the engagement from the stock they have purchased. Then, a player reveals the target old one if necessary, and reveals the top card of the combat deck. Each combat card lists each of the 6 old ones that a player may fight, and lists in chart form which types of combat units deal damage, and if the player themselves take damage or lose sanity from this round of combat. Then, a player chooses Press Your Luck style to either remain in combat or withdraw. If a player remains in combat, they start a new round of combat and draw another combat card. This continues until either a player is forced to withdraw through losing all their units or sanity, deals enough damage to defeat the Great Old One, or voluntarily withdraws. The game features competitive, cooperative, and a very engaging solo mode, but one of the coolest things about the competitive game is that the Great Old Ones also get a score at the end of the game based upon how many farms they blight, how many Great Old Ones are left alive, and how many are left undiscovered at the end of the game. It's highly likely that the Great Old Ones will wind up winning the game and enslaving humanity again because none of the players did well enough to warrant a victory. That extra level of competitiveness against the game itself is very engaging and makes for a very challenging game. I've only seen a legitimate winner in multiplayer games a couple of times so far, in fact. I love this game. Setup is a bit of a chore, but the gameplay keeps me coming back for more, usually, punishment. Trying to defeat the old ones and the other players is very addicting, and it's become the sort of game I find myself continually thinking about when I'm not playing it. As we'll see in a segment later in this episode, it wound up quite high on my top games of 2018 list. I'm only half joking when I say AuZtralia might be Martin Wallace's best train game yet. Obscure Bryce Game segment time. This week on the segment, I'm going to tell you about Dragon Island, a fairly recent release from designer Mike Fitzgerald and R&R Games that has really flown under the radar. Listeners may recall Mike Fitzgerald's name from an earlier episode's Obscure Bryce Game segment as the revolutionary designer of Pez the card game. But most people will be more familiar with him as the celebrated designer of Wyatt Earp, Diamonds, and Baseball Highlights. But one thing that ties all those games together is uniqueness. Mike Fitzgerald games don't feel like anyone else's, so when his name pops up on a new release, I'm interested. Here's how Dragon Island works. Players are mages gathering mana and using it to capture dragons. They do this by laying terrain hexes on the growing modular board, collecting mana of a combination equal to the hex's color and the color of the surrounding ones, moving their mage to a new location, and using the mana they have collected to erect useful magical structures, but mostly to capture dragons. The dragons come in several colors, and players score set collection points for them at the end of the game. I was surprised at the brisk pace of the game. Each turn follows a multi-step process, and I initially thought the steps might take a while to perform for each player. But most of the steps are optional or conditional, and turns wind up going quite quick, and there aren't very many of them altogether. The game ends when all the tiles have been laid, and this is one of those tight Euro games that seems to end before players have had a chance to accomplish even part of what they might hope to do. This creates meaningful decisions throughout the game, and I'm interested in exploring it more now that I've added it to my collection. It's a new year, and that means it's time to reflect on the year just completed. Each year I put together 6 top 10 lists. My top 10 released in the year, the top 10 new to me, top 10 most played, top 10 most disappointing, top 10 games only I played, and top 10 kids games. I'll start with something positive this week, my top 10 games released in 2018. First, the honorable mention, Spring Meadow. If I had to rank all 3 parts of Ue's puzzle trilogy, Spring Meadow would just barely be first. I like them all and think they're all solid games, but Spring Meadow has the most diverse selection of tiles, and the most interesting solo mode. I also like how it challenges players to build their board from the bottom up, which is a fun restriction to deal with. Number 10, The Reckoners. I don't think I've come across a game that has made me want to read the book it was based on yet, but The Reckoners did indeed spark that desire. It's a unique concept that translates well to the cooperative board game genre, and creates a truly challenging puzzle for players to solve. I also appreciate how The Reckoners encourages players to make decisions independently, while contributing to the team at the same time. Number 9, Blue Lagoon. This is a delicious point salad with elegant mechanics that appeals to both my love of set collection and my love of route building, a great combination of mechanics in a surprisingly affordable package. Number 8, Rising Sun. I was not expecting to like this game based on Eric Lang's nonsensical description of it being inspired by diplomacy, but I gave it a try, liked it a lot, and immediately had regret about not backing it on Kickstarter. Fortunately, the local board game cafe had a Kickstarter edition for sale, and I was able to get the complete package nearly for free after cashing in some gift cards I'd been stockpiling from weekly trivia winnings. Number 7, Warsaw, City of Ruin. City building isn't the most interesting of themes to me, but city building with some destruction to deal with? That's a cool concept. This game takes all the interesting decisions from Between Two Cities and turns it into a competitive game. Because of that, it works better than Between Two Cities with small groups. Number 6, Steamrollers. This is a game that had been on my radar ever since I read a designer diary for it on BGG several years ago. The selling point of Steam, the roll and write game, caught my attention and works beautifully in actual execution. The Kickstarter edition that was fulfilled earlier in the year includes lots of variations, and the inclusion of an engaging solo mode means infinite replayability in this box. Number 5, Barbarians, The Invasion. This game has really flown under the radar, but I think it turned out to be one of the most innovative worker placement games ever seen. The 3D rotating volcano worker placement board offers tremendous opportunities for interesting decision-making. The tech tree offers even more interesting decisions, and the area control aspect that ties it all together is clean and works well. Plus, it has great table presence, and my only regret when I showcased it at a recent local convention was not allowing enough time to play a complete game. Number 4, Der Quacksalber von Quedlinburg. Wolfgang Warsch has exploded onto the board game scene this year, and his Kennerspiel win with Der Quacksalber von Quedlinburg is deserved. This is a fun game, and, I think, offers a better execution of bag building than another recent game, Altiplano. Number 3, Western Legends. I was really uncertain about this game during its Kickstarter campaign and backed it at the last minute. Self-proclaimed sandbox games always make me leery, but Western Legends works great. The huge selection of characters in the Kickstarter edition and the huge deck of story cards offer tons of replayability. I was quite relieved when this game turned out so well, after another Kickstarter that had been fulfilled right before it, and which will be highlighted prominently in my top 10 most disappointing list, turned out so poorly. Number 2, AuZtralia. Wow! I cannot get enough of this game, and I haven't even tried the Western map or the co-op mode yet, let alone some of the increased difficulty variants. Those great old